Hello. Before we get down to cinema, I would like to draw your attention to our Patreon. Regular listeners will know that these podcasts are supported by Quad, our home cinema in Derby, UK. But as Quad is a charity, we want to make Cinelit as self-sustainable as possible. So, to that end, we have set up a two-tier way in which you can support Cinelit. For our 35mm Cine fans, you'll get a bonus additional episode each month where we will be deep diving into an area of cinema that will be exclusive to Patreon subscribers for at least 6 months before it arrives like a late dinner guest on the regular feed. Plus, you get the episodes a week in advance of the main feed release. But if you want to support us and don't feel that pressing need to have the additional podcast each month, but still want that warm, satisfying feeling of being part of the Cinelit success story, then you can become an 8mm Cine fan, where you can donate and get our heartfelt thanks. Head over to the Patreon page and subscribe if you can. However, we know that times are hard at the moment, so please do not feel you need to subscribe if you are not able. We'll still be putting out new, free-to-listen-to episodes on a regular basis throughout the year. Now let's get back to your regular scheduled broadcast. Okay, welcome to Cinelit. We are heading back 50 years to the crime-ridden streets of New York City, to the birth of the war on drugs, and to one of the most iconic decorated crime films of all time. Today we are looking at 1971's Best Picture Oscar winner, The French Connection, and its 1975 sequel. My name is Adam Marsh, and I am joined as ever by Cinelit's resident expert, Daryl Buxton. How are you, Daryl?
I'm good, thanks, Adam.
Cool. Is it a film? Are these two films that you are fans of? Generally?
Yeah, I love French Connection. I quite like bits of French Connection too. It doesn't quite hold together, but I have got sort of theories and takes on it that we might go on to discuss. So I think it's one of those films where if you watch it at face value and absolutely accept everything that is put in front of you on screen, I don't think it's all that good, and it's certainly not as good as the brilliant original. But I think if you sort of delve into it a bit, and if you sort of look at certain scenes from certain characters' point of view, and look at what's going on in the film, and think, is everything that we're seeing actually real here, or is some of it hallucinatory? It sort of changes French Connection too a little bit. So we might get into that later on.
Okay, we'll let's get into that later on, because I'm not convinced, to be honest, Daryl. I'm not convinced. Okay, so the thing that struck me when I was doing research for this podcast is that the first film was directed by William Friedkin, who went on to win the Oscar for this very film, for Best Director as well as Best Film. It won. It was nominated for eight Oscars, won 5. You know, it was a massive critical success and commercial success as well. But this is not Friedkin's first film. This is like his 5th film as director. And it struck me, looking at those 4 films that came previously, there's nothing in those 4 films that indicates that he has a French connection in his locker.
No. This is almost the first Friedkin film. You know, his previous work was just made by a director. You know, he just happens to be the guy sort of calling the shots, you know. This seems personal, you know, and this seems to sort of set the stage for the rest of his career.
It is interesting because when you look at his career, I mean, even though this does set the stage for his career and give him the opportunities to do the things that he wants to do, the first 4 movies, you've got like a Sonny and Cher comedy. You've got like an adaptation of Harold Pinter's The Birthday Party. You've got a star-studded comedy, The Night They Raided Minsky's,
where Bill Friedkin teams up with Norman Wisdom.
Wisdom,
never to be forgotten combo. Yeah.
What an odd collection of films. People in that film.
Yeah.
And then he did
The Boys in the Band. Yeah.
The Boys in the Band. Yeah, I've not seen that, but I read the description of it, and it's a heterosexual who finds himself at a homosexual party. Now, I've not seen it, but I'm willing to bet it's not aged well.
No, you know, I wonder, would it make a great double bill with Cruising or not, which is very, very much a Friedkin film, a very sort of personal Friedkin film, you know, and you wonder if The Boys in the Band along vaguely similar themes, but with completely different treatment, I think. So it's interesting. You've got two movies there by the same director, 10 years apart, on a very similar sort of theme, but completely different in many respects. And one of them a far more personal film than the other, I think.
It's not often directors get an opportunity to, I guess, shift careers a little bit like Friedkin did here. I mean, I guess it was easier back in the 70s. It's certainly today, there's not that many people who have 4 or 5 films already directed that suddenly have a coming out film, a film 5. Usually their careers have been and gone by then, and they found their groove, and that's what they do. I mean, the ones that leap to mind recently, I suppose, are more comedy directors who moved into drama and thrillers and things like that. So, like people like Adam McKay and Jay Roach and Peter Farrelly, I guess, with Green Book. But we're talking Friedkin. Friedkin, he seems like a director that really. I mean, you talk about him being personal film, French Connection. I think it's definitely a film that establishes style as a director, or his coming back part as a director. This is Friedkin as a director. I think he would love to have made a career just directing comedies, though, because he has a few stabs at comedies throughout his career. None of them seem to land, throughout his career. Obviously, he keeps getting called back to do horror, and he keeps getting called back to do crime stuff.
And people do tend to see French Connection as the start of his career. And I think Francis Ford Coppola was very similar to this. He of course, supposedly got The Godfather on the basis that it was sort of him or Martin Scorsese were the only two sort of semi-Italian directors in the movie business, And of course, Hollywood at this point, 1971, is also looking at, they're thinking, well, John Ford and Howard Hawks and Hitchcock aren't going to be around forever. We've got to tap into, whether we like it or not, we've got to tap into some of this new talent, this film school talent that's emerging. And I think Friedkin may well have benefited from that a little bit, and so suddenly films like French Connection were coming along, and it was this younger breed of director that was getting assigned to them, very much like Coppola did with The Godfather. 71 as well, crime films are in the zeitgeist with stuff like Dirty Harry and so on. Yeah, Friedkin may well have just been in the right place at the right time with this one, but boy, did he pick it up and run with it.
Yeah, I mean, the film's quite an interesting film. It's basically a police procedural kind of film which follows a drug bust. It's based on a non-fiction book from 1961. About a drugs bust, and it follows it fairly straight in a way. It's filmed in a very documentary style, which Friedkin obviously decided that was the right take for this material. But yeah, what do you think to the style of it? It's very unique at this period, I guess. It's certainly not Dirty Harry.
It is. It's something new, which I think is why it came to the attention of people like the Academy Awards Committee. You've had Bullitt 2 or 3 years before this with its famous car chase. We'll discuss the chase in this film in detail later, but Friedkin takes the idea of the chase, which, I mean, Bullitt sort of set a new bar for that, and then along comes Friedkin, and he does something completely different with his and says, look, okay, you've seen a great conventional car chase in Bullitt, that has sort of re-established what the idea of that type of movie action can be. Now look what I've got in my locker, But yeah, I think the documentary style is a good fit for him too, and that's something that he's sort of continued a little bit. This very cold sort of tone that the film has got, and very matter of fact and very clinical. I think he then applied to horror with the Exorcist, and he applied to a film remake with the Sorcerer, remaking The Wages of Fear, and then applied that very similar tone to much of his later career. You go through films like Cruising and Rampage and so on. I think French Connection is the film that establishes that William Friedkin tone, but I think in turn he may well have taken that from this subject matter and from this material, and I think this film may have influenced him as much as he influenced it.
Yeah, I mean, he talked about how he'd seen the film Zed And that was a big influence on him as well, to the point of casting as well. He asked to get one of the cast members of Zed and got the wrong one in Fernando Rey.
That's right. Yeah, I think he'd seen Francisco Rabal in also in Buñuel's Belle de Jour.
Yeah.
And he went to a casting agent and said, there's this Spanish actor, I can't remember his name, but he's in all these European films. He's worked a lot with Buñuel, you know. And they sort of introduced him to Fernando Rey, and he said, oh, that's not the guy, but then went ahead with him anyway. And he's brilliant. He's a great fit for the villain of this piece.
He doesn't speak French though. It's quite a fascinating thing. They had to redub him when they sent the film abroad.
Yeah. Well, these Europeans are all the same, aren't they? When you're in Hollywood in 1971.
Well, absolutely, yeah. There's certainly some in-baked racism in this film anyway, with the characters of Doyle and Cloudy Russo.
Yeah, well, let's talk about Popeye Doyle because he's not, again, this is something sort of new, I think, for Hollywood and for sort of mainstream crime cinema. This guy is not a hero in any sense, you know. In fact, I think that he sort of sets a bit of a template here for the actor Gene Hackman, because Hackman was to go on to play characters who, specifically in films like The Conversation soon after this, and then in Enemy of the State some years later, played these sort of characters with a very sort of obsessive drive to the point where it almost makes them ill, you know, and it almost takes over their lives. And I think Popeye's like that. I think there are moments in the French Connection, and it spills over to French Connection 2, I think, which we'll talk about later, where you can't really sort of root for this guy, not just because he's a very sort of unlikable and sort of borderline racist character and seems to sort of hate his job and hate everyone around him and hate all of his sort of fellow detectives and officers and so on. He's very much a loner. I think he's very much at the centre of his own world. He's in the police simply because it gives him a means of just putting an intense focus on what he does in his job, following it right through to the end, and not caring who he hurts, including himself, in the pursuit of reaching his goal. There's a scene in the French Connection where there's suspicion that drugs are being smuggled in a motor vehicle, and the police impound it and call it into their private garage to sort of dismantle the car. So they've got experts involved in this, and they can't find anything. And Hackman's going berserk. Popeye's going berserk at this. You know, why can't you go? You guys are supposed to be good at this. Why can't you find anything? You know, and they're sort of saying, there's nothing here. You know, we've looked everywhere that we usually look. We've taken the car to pieces on your instruction, and we're telling you there's nothing here. And he's still insisting that they do more, that they look for more, that they look in places they don't normally look. You know, we won't sort of spoil this for people that haven't seen the film. We won't tell them the outcome of the scene. But whatever the outcome of that scene was, whether they found anything or whether they didn't, you sense that Popeye Doyle's approach to this would have been exactly the same. It would have been forensic, but to the point of obsession and to the point of madness. And I think that spilled over into his character in The Conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that scene, the scene where they're ripping the car apart and literally tearing its pieces, ripping its pieces, it kind of bothered me because they've got to give that car back. And they've got to make it look like they haven't ripped it apart. And they rip it to pieces. And it's a little thing.
It should bother you because I get the impression this is all down to Popeye Doyle's instruction. And he's just thinking, you know, it's not my responsibility that we get this car back together. You guys are employed to do that. I've got this drive. I've got this absolute obsession with nailing these people and nailing the Mr. Big, you know, and I'm almost making myself ill doing that. And if as a consequence of that, I make a mechanic's day a little more difficult than it ought to be, I don't care. and he's just not got any empathy for anyone, including himself. And I think it's a brilliant characterization. I think it's brilliantly played, and there's no attempt on Hackman's part to make this guy likable either. No, some actors would try to do that with this character. He doesn't.
No, I mean, Hackman's fantastic in the role, and it is quite remarkable that he was by no means the first option for this role. They literally seem to go through the Rolodex of Hollywood actors.
Yeah. Well, again, his career at that time as an actor is pretty much in the same place that Friedkin was as a director. He'd made a bit of a splash in films like Bonnie and Clyde and stuff, but he wasn't a sort of go-to guy at that point. This is the film that made him that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, but like they couldn't afford Paul Newman. That's who they wanted, apparently. But they literally went Jackie Gleason, Peter Boyle, Steve McQueen, Charles Bronson, Rod Taylor. It's like literally anybody other than Gene Hackman, it seems to be, until he finally went, oh, go on then, we'll have Gene Hackman. And it's what it's astonishing that it could have slipped away. It could have slipped away. It could have been just a footnote in Paul Newman's career or a footnote in Steve McQueen's career.
Yeah, and it would have been as well, because they would have played this part in a very conventional way. You can imagine Newman or McQueen playing this in a very Newman and or McQueen type way. And it wouldn't have been one of the best remembered movies of their career.
No.
It would have just been another role. It would have been another notch, and it would have been a competent film. I think both of those actors would have seen the poor character traits within Popeye and would have played on those a little bit, but they would have had to make him likable in certain scenes, or have him having a few sort of nice one-liners or little wisecracks, or winking at the camera every now and then, just to say, yeah, I'm playing a bastard, but it's Paul Newman playing him, and you love me, don't you? And Hackman could come into this without any of that baggage and just say, I'm just going to be ruthless and storm my way through this film, and I don't care who gets hurt. Popeye doesn't care who gets hurt.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fact. I mean, you're talking about Popeye again. He's an interesting character in that we don't really learn that much about him.
No.
It's all the job. It's all the obsession. We get hints at it. We see him in his apartment, which is a tip,
Yeah. I love that the first thing we see of him is he's dressed as Santa Claus.
Yeah, he's dressed as Santa Claus. Yeah, which is farthest away.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's brilliant because not only does that tell you nothing about the guy, it actually it's a brilliant choice by Friedkin there. That not only is he sort of trying to not tell you anything about this guy, he actually sort of obfuscates it a little bit. There's a bit of trickery there, saying, "Oh, this guy's Santa Claus. You love Santa," and then we find out, no, we ain't gonna like this Santa, and then the character just gets progressively more and more obsessed and less likable as the film goes on. I mean, he's got this partnership going on with Roy Scheider, and Scheider isn't a particularly likable character in this film either. But compared to Popeye Doyle, he's the guy you'd like to go and have a pint with afterwards. He'd be your mate out of the crew here. It's very similar to what we saw in British films and TV over the next 5 or 6 years, I suppose, culminating in things like The Sweeney. It's very much that sort of dynamic, this partnership where you don't actually like any of the guys involved and they don't like their job.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you do get hints at where he is and where he fits into the world, mainly from the stakeouts, from the trailing of the French guy, Charnier.
Yeah.
He's the well-to-do, rich kingpin, likes the finer things in life, and you have that really nice scene where they're in that cafe, in that restaurant, eating ridiculous amounts of really expensive, fine dining, and you've got Popeye across the street in his dirty Mac eating a pizza out of a street vendor piece of paper.
Yeah, and terrible coffee that they can't even get down. Oh, it's such a brilliant scene, so well intercut, and doesn't look. It sounds a bit sort of on the nose and a bit cliched, and it doesn't play like that at all. It plays with all the symbolism that it should do, and it really, really works. It's brilliantly done.
Yeah, I mean, particularly because we don't get much more information about Popeye's real life and his life outside of work, other than that he doesn't have one,
Yeah, you are learning from him by looking at the slices of pizza that he eats, sort of drooping out of their carton, or as you say, the brief sort of glimpses of his home life and the fact that he sort of hasn't got one, and that he lives in this terrible, terrible apartment. Again, this gives the sense that he's almost living the life of like a street rat or something. And it's not even to the point where, he comes alive when he's doing detective work, because he doesn't even give that impression. No. It is just constantly this got to catch the villain, got to get there, got to do whatever I've got to do to nail these guys, and then you do sense even if he caught a criminal, he wouldn't be satisfied. He wouldn't have a sense of achievement. It'd just be, okay, that job's done, on to the next one, on to the next terrible job that I've got to haul myself out of bed in the morning to do. There's no sense of satisfaction with this character.
One of the interesting things about this, you touched on it a little earlier when we were talking about the symbolism of the two dining sequences. You have, I guess, the most important. It won a lot of awards, this film, but one of the most important ones that it was recognised for was film editing. And this movie seems to live or die on the way it's edited. It's so well cut together. It's so well put, particularly because the whole film, it's essentially one long stakeout trailing. It moves from one.
Come pursuit.
Pursuit. Yeah. So there's not much more to it in some ways. There's obviously a lot more to it subtextually, but the actual plot is them doing the footwork, following people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when it's what he said, he's like, he doesn't even get a satisfaction out of doing detective work. It's like there's not much detective work done in this film. In the sense of like, it's not like a Sherlock Holmes where he discovers a clue and that leads him to this amazing revelation. And then it's not, it's just general footwork, a la Dragnet, it's that kind of, it's like a hardcore, bitter, cynical Dragnet.
Yeah. Again, it's the sort of boring side of police work, and we talked about this on the Walter Matthau podcast recently, where we were talking about Laughing Policeman and how that does very much the same. That sort of follows. That takes the idea of the police procedural to its ultimate in that you're sort of following all the lines that go nowhere as well. And there's a sort of sense of that in French Connection. We certainly see the failures of police work as well as the successes. And either way, not it doesn't seem to matter. It just seems to be played as a job here, and not a very satisfying job, and one that everyone who does it seems to hate, and Popeye absolutely sort of embodies that. He's almost a poster boy for the working day-to-day copper who hates his job, and all this really adds to the tone of the film as well, I think. And it's amazing how gripping and how exciting and how audience friendly it becomes, given that everything that Friedkin's doing and everything that the actors are doing seems to play against that. And I think you've hit on the film's success, and how it connects with an audience is through the editing process. I think it just moves and moves and moves, and it tells its story through editing, and it tells its symbolism through editing. I mean, take the classic scene where Hackman and Ray are on the subway platform, and Fernando Rey knows that Popeye is after him. Popeye sort of knows that he knows, but he's not quite sure. And they're getting on and off the same subway carriage and trying to fool each other. And again, the editing there and the use of close up and knowing when to do a long shot or a medium shot, when to show both guys in frame in the carriage or coming in and out. It's brilliant. And we get right inside the heads of those characters, and that's done largely through the editing, combined with, I think, their facial expressions, because there's no dialogue in that scene, very, very little. It's all done with their sort of glances to camera, their expressions, their looks to each other, the shots where you've got other sort of commuters and other train passengers in between them, and you just get a glimpse of an eye or half a face or something, and that's all played out through the edit.
Yeah, I mean, that sequence, arguably for me, I mean, the car chase gets a lot of the credits and a lot of the press and coverage for it, but for me, that sequence is the key one for me. I love how they build on the sequences prior to that. So you have them following the Sonny characters. Sonny?
Yeah.
Italian, the Italian guy. They have them following him, and they show how they would normally tail someone. And there's about 8 people involved. They're crisscrossing. When they get spotted, they move on and somebody else comes on board. And it's got a really wonderful flow to it where you see how they can tail a suspect really successfully. And then obviously later on, we have this sequence with Gene Hackman following Charnier, and it's just him having to do it all on his own. Yeah.
And it's a
failure. It's a failure, but it adds to that tension as well. You know that this is not going to be. It's not a case of just like, oh, he's going to tail him. It's not a problem. You know that how they tail people involves 8 people crisscrossing, and that's how they do it successfully. Yeah. And now he's on his own, and we're going to show you how difficult it is to tail someone. And that was really clever. The way that the setup was really clever. That added to that tension. The scene. Yeah.
I think the scene also works as a pivotal moment, because if you think about Michael Mann's Heat from the late 80s, and how I'm not a massive fan of Heat, I have to say, and but the people who love it always rave about, there's this great moment where the film keeps De Niro and Pacino apart all the way through, but there's this one scene where they meet in the middle, and it's great, and it's this great iconic scene. I think this scene in French Connection may well have inspired that, and I think it's the equivalent of that scene, and it's done in about 1/10 of the time, and it's miles better for my money. I think what that scene does is the same as what Heat tried to do, and I think it does it much more successfully, because it's briefer, and there's less dialogue, and it's all done with these little glances, and you never know what the other guy's thinking. But what that does is it pits these 2 titans of the film, these 2 gods of the film, against each other, just for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to have that moment where they face off. You can't. I mean, that's what I mean. Arguably, you didn't need that scene. You should have had them separate and live in their own movies. You know what I mean? But they were never going to do that.
But you do need that crossover, and again, it's brilliantly handled in the edit. It's well handled by Friedkin, keeping it so very, very brief and confining it to just that sort of minute or so of screen time, and not making a big deal of it in the way that Michael Mann did. His film sort of says, we're bringing our 2 stars together now. Everybody look, you've got to look at this and listen and watch the method acting here, and watch De Niro and Pacino play off against each other. And it's so understated in French Connection, and because of that, I think it works better.
Well, I think also in Heat, he's obviously playing on years of Pacino and De Niro being the guys. Yeah. So, but for me, that throws you out of the movie, because you're not sitting there thinking these characters are meeting. You're thinking, oh my God, it's Al Pacino and Robert De Niro in a scene together.
And you're supposed to think that, and it's sort of, far from being a highlight of the film for me, it sort of kills it because of that. Suddenly, you're at method school now, guys. You in the audience, sit and watch how great these guys are. And the French Connection doesn't do that. It's watch Popeye Doyle getting his job wrong yet again, and going away and mooching around and thinking what a failure he is, and how the bad guys got away, and how terrible his life is. It's completely different. It's so similar in some respects, and yet it's poles apart in others, and it's just brilliant. It's just so good for this film.
One of the things that struck me as I was watching particularly the first 10-15 minutes, was just the lack of music. And I thought, oh my God, is this going to be like this all the way through the film? Because if so, it's brilliant. And it wasn't. And what they did is that they had no music, and then they slowly introduced music to punctuate the scenes as it went on. I mean, nowadays you have music telling you what to think, at every point in the movie. You know, it doesn't matter. Some guy going into a toilet, you know, you've got music accompanying everything.
Yeah.
Here, there was just nothing accompanying nothing in the early scenes, and for me, that made me pay attention more.
Exactly.
It was like, all right, for God's sake, this is bloody important. Pay attention. We're not even going to have music on. Listen and watch what's happening. It's bloody concentrate.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I agree. And while we're on music, I mean, this is a big personal thing for me, but the first music you get in the film is about 10 minutes in, and it's not soundtrack, it's not score, it's the 3 Degrees. Yeah. So I'm there. Take my ticket money now. You know, a movie that promises you the 3 Degrees in the first 10 minutes. Whatever it is, I'm there, you know. So the fact that it's the French Connection is just brilliant. You know, it's so good that it sort of starts with that. But you go to the 3 Degrees, having had the scene where Scheider and Hackman have done a drugs raid at a predominantly sort of black customized bar, you know, black patronized bar, and the racism and the treatment of the suspects there, and the treatment of the people who aren't suspects. There are obviously a lot of innocent people in that place, you know, and to Hackman, they're all just like, well, we know you've got drugs hidden somewhere, you know, and it sets who this guy is, you know, straight away. Certainly in terms of his attitude, not necessarily. I don't know that it is racist necessarily. It just happens to be that this is a black patronized bar that he goes to. You sense that if he went to an Italian or Chinese neighborhood or any New York bar, he'd be the same. You know, whether the guys were white or whatever. You know, he'd treat them just as scum.
Well, yeah, but I think there was definitely profiling involved in the way, and because obviously when they finish and Roy Scheider's character comes out and he's hurt his hand through the fight sequence. He had a knife. He said, well, of course he had a knife. You know, he's like, and it wasn't because we could have been white. He's like, yeah, but you know, doesn't matter, does it? You know, we know they all carry. You know, it's that kind of mentality.
I think the thing that backs up my theory there, though, is a big thing. It's a big central point in the movie. It's the fact that their code name for Charnier is Frog One.
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. He's he doesn't. He doesn't discriminate in his discrimination.
He's an all-encompassing racist. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get on to the meat and potatoes of this film, then, the car chase sequence.
Yeah. My first thing to say about that is I don't think is it a car chase?
It's not chasing a car; it's using a car to chase a train.
A lot of it takes place on foot as well, and the car that Hackman is using is a stolen car. He's supposedly commandeered it from a commuter on his way home, but the way that he does that it's almost like robbery. It's almost like the way that a criminal would take somebody's car, you know. And so there are all these components. And again, as I say, Bullitt has sort of set the tone for what a movie car chase is. And here's Friedkin completely overturning that and trying to do everything as possibly different as he can, you know, only having one car involved, as you say, having it as a stolen car, effectively, having a lot of the work done as sort of footwork, you know, a lot of it sort of running from place to place. The chase is with a sort of runaway sort of elevated rail train that's hurtling through Brooklyn. So even without the police on the tail, you know, it'd be an exciting scene if it was just about the runaway train, you know. But with the driver having a heart attack and the sort of train officials being shot at and so on, that'd be great in itself. The fact that you've got this police chase taking place underneath under the elevated line is brilliant. And then when things happen, like the Hackman again is so very obsessed with attaining his goal that he doesn't care who he might run over or run into or which cars he might crash into on the way, you know, or the fact that he might beat this guy's car up in the same way that the drug car gets sort of trashed later on. It's a very, very interesting sort of parallel there. It's all about his obsessive drive to get the job done.
Yeah, I mean, his obsessive drive doesn't have an end point either.
No.
You know, it doesn't matter if he catches the guy and books him or he shoots him dead. You know, it's still, there's no sort of line that he doesn't seem to be wanting to shy from crossing. You know what I mean?
Sure. So what are your thoughts on the chase then, Adam?
Oh, it's brilliant! It's brilliant. I mean, it's funny how I like how they mix it up in the like you say, that some of it's on foot, some of it's on train, and just the idea of a car chasing a train underneath the elevated rails is a brilliant idea. I mean, they echo it a little bit in the second film, where they have Gene Hackman chasing a boat on foot.
And again, using a streetcar for part of the journey. So it's hopping on and off that and running for part of it, and doing his whole sort of fat, sweaty copper bit, you know. And that's the scene I want to talk about in detail later on when we get on to French Connection 2. But yeah, there are definite parallels there, and you do sense that John Frankenheimer's thinking, well, yeah, it's a movie with the words French and connection in the title. People have got certain expectations here, you know, and I think French Connection 2 does play against those expectations very, very well. But I think in that scene, which sort of forms the finale of the film, there are definite nods to what Friedkin did here. Again, how great's the editing in the chase as well?
It's brilliant. I think one of the things, I mean, just dial back a little bit, because the editing is fantastic. But one of the things that dial back, we talked about Popeye being obsessive. I think the other thing to throw in the mix here is like just his place in New York City. Mm. And he feels comfortable in New York City. It's his town. Yeah. Whether it's a black neighborhood, whether it's an Italian neighborhood, it's still his town. Yeah. He's the guy. He's the man. So taking a car, he doesn't see that as robbery. He's not comedy. He's comedy. That's his bloody car. Yeah. It's my town. It's my town. It's my car. It's my town. I'm taking that car, and that guy's going down. You know, so it's that kind of all overwhelming arrogance. Of the character. That's
part of his obsessive character, I think. You know, he thinks he owns New York, but not in the way that the sailors in On the Town arrive there for a day in 1948 and sort of take over the town for 24 hours. You know, this is not a good reclamation of New York. You know, it's not a good ownership of the town. It's part of his rotting, horrible sort of character. As you say, his idea of taking ownership of New York and being the boss of New York is that he can steal somebody's car anytime he likes. You know, he's a cop and he can do what he wants.
Yeah. I think to go back onto the editing. The editing is brilliant in this thing. All the way through the movie, it's tense, and this just amps up the tension. And then the music comes on board as well, and it kind of culminates in this particular car sequence. Yeah. All those things that they've been slowly building as the movie goes along.
Yeah, Friedkin's so good at that because, you know, he almost sort of invents MTV editing at points in this chase, but he always knows when to rein back as well. It starts very, very slowly, it ends very slowly, but it sort of reaches a climax. You know, it builds and builds and builds. And you get to the point where suddenly there's this fast editing going on of a type that Hollywood didn't really know. Directors like George Romero had introduced it into the sort of independent sector in the late 60s. Lots and lots of fast cutting in films by some of those more sort of underground filmmakers at the time. But Friedkin's bringing that into the mainstream, but he's doing it in a way that Hollywood can accept. He's sort of slowly introducing the idea by building the scene on from a slow basis and reaching a crescendo and then sort of easing back off again. It's great. And if you think about he did a movie called Jade 20 years or so later, sort of mid-90s, and that's got a great car chase in, which is sort of the antithesis of French Connection in one way, in that it's a car chase that takes place in snarled up traffic in gridlock, you know, and the cars are moving at about half a mile an hour. And having said that, there is a sense of that in this movie, because you do see vehicles stuck in traffic early on, before the chase starts. And so Friedkin's obviously filed that idea away. Because William Friedkin and his editor knows what's coming later on, they're brave enough to start that scene in an ultra slow way, knowing that they're going to reach this point where they're going to have you absolutely on the edge of your seat, But then he obviously filed that idea away and thought, well, by the time he came to do Jade, it was like, well, we'll completely reverse that, and I'll now do the slowest car chase in cinema history because I'm the car chase guy. I think that's a way in which you can see how the French Connection has sort of fed into his career. I think there are a lot of ways in which this film has sort of affected the rest of what he's done over the next sort of 4 or 5 decades. And that's a point to make about this. The film is 50 years old this year.
Yeah, no, it's 50 years old now. But before we move on to the sequel, has this film's influence lasted?
I think it had a fairly instant influence.
Yeah.
And I think the cop film has sort of changed. I think a few films had an influence. We've mentioned some of them already. Dirty Harry from the same year, some of the Walter Matthau stuff that we talked about, and that whole wave of early 70s crime cinema had an influence to a certain point, I think. I think a new wave of cop and crime movie came along in the 80s, the sort of Miami Vice type thing. And I think that almost sort of subsumed the influence of the gritty 70s film until you got directors like Tarantino and that wave of 90s gangster films sort of brought some of that gritty 70s style back for a while. But I think people are now more influenced by the 90s gangster movies and by the late 80s wave of cop movies, rather than directly by this wave of early 70s films. So if they are influenced by the 70s movies and by French Connection in particular, it's almost by a process of osmosis. I think it's filtered through Tarantino and filtered through the 90s directors who sort of homage these movies in their later work. I don't think the French Connection is necessarily seen as a film that people want to copy these days.
No, I would heartily agree with that. You can see the influences in, like, say, 20 years, up to 20 years after it came out. But once you get to the 90s, even those 90s directors, they're taking the editing, I think, as part of what they foresee as its influence.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Instead of having it in short bursts for poignancy and impact like Friedkin does, they kind of just like that just becomes the whole movie's edited in that kind of style.
Yeah. And of course, bring things right up to date. Here we are in 2021, and what's the mainstream audience's idea of a car chase movie these days? It's the CGI of Fast and Furious. So things have changed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, there's much more gone in 60 seconds car chase style. It is the impact now.
Sure.
Yeah, but it's interesting. It's like because the car chase is not. It's not just the car. There's a purpose to the car chase.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of the Fast and Furious, as much as I love the Fast and Furious movies, they feel like their car chases for the sake of being a car chase.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the sequel, which we've had big hit. French Connection, 8 Oscar nominations, 5 wins, big box office, made Gene Hackman a star. Gene Hackman's riding high, does The Conversation, again nominated for Oscars. He comes back to do The French Connection 2 in 1975. 4 years have passed since 1971. Hollywood's a very different place in those 4 years.
Sure.
Very much, very different. In fact, audiences maybe are not wanting slow building car sequences. They want killer sharks. They want, arguably, the blockbuster now. They've had Exorcist. They've had the event movies. They're wanting that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, Friedkin is as much responsible for that as anyone with The Exorcist.
Sure.
But and also, of course, audiences weren't necessarily used to sequels at that time, or certainly the idea that you'd have a sequel with the number 2 at the end of it. That just wasn't done. And The Godfather had sort of changed that a little bit. It's always said the first movie that called itself Part 2 was Quatermass 2, the Hammer science fiction film in the 50s, and that didn't sort of catch on as a thing. You had sequels and you had movie franchises through the 60s then, but the idea that you'd got a film called The Godfather Part 2 was sort of almost unheard of, and The French Connection was one of the first films to sort of respond to that. 4 years between sequels again was sort of a few years later, that was unheard of. It was you bang your sequel out the year after or 2 years after. To have a 4-year gap was unusual. To call the film French Connection 2 was unusual, and again, it's something audiences at the time would have still been getting a little bit used to. And as you say, by this point, they'd all seen Jaws as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, you made the comparison there to The Godfather, and I see a lot of comparisons to this. Yeah. And I think Coppola came back and did Godfather 2 and didn't see it as a way of capitalizing on Godfather 1. He saw it as a way of doing a second great movie. Yeah. Friedkin didn't take the opportunity to come back and do French Connection 2. Was that a mistake on his part?
No, because instead of that, we got The Exorcist and we got Sorcerer, and they were the films that he desperately wanted to make. French Connection 2 wouldn't have been a good fit for a director like Friedkin. I mean, we all know the stories about Friedkin, allegedly sort of firing revolvers on the sets of his movies and terrorizing cast and crew. Can you imagine him on the set of a movie that he didn't want to do, that he'd sort of been forced into doing by a producer or a studio? So yeah, I don't think he would ever have had an interest in a sequel. He didn't want to do Exorcist 2 either. He's never been that kind of guy. But I think once the studio had decided that we're going to have a French Connection 2, they wanted it to be a prestige film. They wanted to get a name director, and they obviously wanted their stars back. Interestingly, Scheider's not in it, and all we've got is the bare bones. We've got that thing that we talked about earlier. We've got the core of the French Connection. We've got Fernando Rey versus Gene Hackman.
Yeah, it's a direct sequel. It should be said. It's not always taken that it's a direct sequel. It's got Popeye going to Marseille to track down Charnier, Fernando Rey, and nail him there. It's kind of got like a fish out of water, American in Paris kind of vibe to it.
So what do you think about it, Adam, in general?
I think it's one of those things where I don't like it. I'll be honest. The first time I saw it, I enjoyed it, and I thought it was really good. And in my head, I lumped them both together as a sort of like duo of movies. Yeah. And as I watched them again recently, I thought this is not working. And that's what it is. It's not so much that it's a bad film. It's just not working for what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a French Connection movie, and they strip out everything to the point where it's like they're obviously trying to not copy William Friedkin and just do a sequel.
Which I admire. I think that's great that they've done that, but then
they go too far.
It sort of doesn't work. Yeah.
But they go too far with it. They take out everything. The only thing that's remaining is Popeye, and it's like, well, really, because the villain's just a villain, You take him out of New York, so he's not comfortable. So you've got those scenes there. The first film's very much about nailing Mr. Big. It's not about the junkies on the street. It's not about the impact of drugs at that level. It's about the impact of drugs at the sort of like high end, nailing the big guy, nailing the big shipment, that kind of level. And they bring it back down and show the influences of drugs in this movie, which doesn't work at all.
I agree.
And like you said, like they lose Roy Scheider's character, who, even though he is like a mini Doyle, it's like, you can see in about 4 years' time he will be getting towards being that kind of character.
Which you got that in the Sweeney, which I mentioned earlier, where you look at Dennis Waterman's character and you think he's going to be Jack Regan in 5 years' time.
Yeah,
and that they actually suggest that in dialogue in various episodes. That he's gonna be the same as his boss. And yeah, you really got that feel with Scheider in French Connection.
And I think you missed that.
Yeah, we do. Yeah,
because in some ways it almost humanizes Popeye.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. Although I do think there are elements of the film that retain that obsessive drive, and that sort of downside to his character, that dislikability of his character is still there. But yeah, I think because there's more focus on him this time, and there's not a nicer guy to sort of play off, we sort of go along a bit more with Popeye, and he gets a few more little jokey remarks, and he's a little bit lighter in this film. I'm not going to use the word likable because he isn't, but he just edges a little bit more towards that, and I think we as a sort of Western audience identify a little bit more, and as an English speaking audience, maybe I should say, we identify with him as that sort of fish out of water character, I think, here, and he becomes a little bit warmer because of that.
A little bit. I mean,
it's not warm, but it's degrees, But,
yeah. I think it's one of those ones where even though he's a fish out of water, he still manages to find a black drug dealer to beat up in the first 5 minutes. So he's still the same old Popeye,
Who doesn't that guy turn out to be an undercover cop as well? Yeah. So again, he's a failure in France just as much as he is at home,
Yeah, I mean, I almost feel like it would have been better had it not been called French Connection 2.
Yeah, I think a year earlier it wouldn't have been. It would have been called, the Marseille.
Well, no. So what I meant was it wasn't involving Popeye. That was a different character.
Having Popeye as a character.
Yeah. For me,
I can see that. Although I do sense that if you'd cast Hackman in another sort of police part around that time, he'd have probably played it as a sort of Popeye spin-off. I think he'd have tried to do different things with it. But I think he does that here anyway. I think his Popeye in this movie is a slightly different character to the one that's in the French Connection. For one thing, this is a fictional story. It's a fictional sequel to a true story original. And as you say, the elephant in the room, I guess, is the huge heroin addiction and cold turkey sequence.
Yeah.
Now, I've just slagged off Heat for having a big method scene slapped in the middle of it, and I think that's also the problem with French Connection too. I think the film grinds to a halt so that we can watch Gene Hackman for 20 minutes doing a bit of method acting.
No, you say 20 minutes. It's closer to 40 minutes, Daryl. It really is. It's about 38, 40 minutes.
Yeah. I didn't time it.
I did.
I'll take your word for it. It's a third of the film then. It's the entire middle of the film. It's the whole second act.
Yeah, it starts at the 40-minute mark, and then it's 40 minutes of him being hooked on heroin by the criminals, him going through the whole sort of like heroin process, him being saved by the police, and then him being detoxed and going cold turkey, and him being really grumpy about it and wanting Hershey bars and things like that. It's just like, and it's in any other movie, it would have been perfectly fine. It's like, oh, this is really good if it was a drama, but it's not a drama. We're on a thriller here. This is supposed to be a thriller. Building on French Connection 1, it was a thrilling movie. This is supposed to be a thriller. We have 40 minutes at the start where we have one sequence at the start where they raid a drugs den, and then the rest of it's him moaning about the political intrigue of the police and being like hated because he's a foreigner, and him wandering around Marseille.
Yeah. Do you know what you've got here, Adam? You've got in the French Connection, you've got Gene Hackman cast in the lead, having been the guy who impressed everyone so much in Bonnie and Clyde, this sort of relative unknown who's oh yeah, we'll try this guy out. As you say, we've asked every other actor in Hollywood and nobody wants to do it. So we're now reduced to this Hackman guy, but we all liked him in Bonnie and Clyde. We'll give him a go. What the difference is now, you've got Oscar winner Gene Hackman with a bit of clout, someone who can call the shots. And the shots that he calls here are I want a sort of off-Broadway chance to show my chops in the entire second act of the movie. And I want this sort of head-to-head scene. Bits of it are great. I love the. I mean, there are parts that I love. My favourite bit is the sort of conversation where he's talking with Bernard Fresson playing Barthélemy, who's the sort of French cop who he's working with or not working with, as the case may be, you know. And there's this lovely bit where Barthélemy and Popeye get confused about the names Gene Kelly and Jean-Claude Killy, and the great Hollywood actor and dancer and the French ski champion, you know. And there are lovely little gags and moments like that within this. But even though I sort of smiled at that point, part of me is thinking, this is all Gene Hackman showing off. He doesn't know the camera's there anymore. You know, this is all about him. He thinks he's on stage in some little 100-seat theatre somewhere off Broadway, you know, because he can be, because he's Oscar winner Gene Hackman and he can do what he likes. And yeah, it's great for him. And there are little moments of it that play well to the audience, but it kills the film. It kills the film.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, like you just said, then it's like there are bits and you like it. It's like I go so far as say I like most of the individual bits of French Connection too.
Yeah.
But when you put it all together as one movie, it just really doesn't work. It's like having really interesting bits from other movies. You know, it's like,
I mean, in the third act, for instance, you know, it's like they've been watching Towering Inferno and Earthquake and the sort of wave of 1973 and 74 disaster movies, because you get the Hotel de Colonnade being set on fire, and that's an important scene, you know. And again, it's sort of all part of what Hackman's character is all about. And it's all very symbolic as well. But suddenly, once the building's burning, it turns into 5 minutes of stuntmen and stunt women leaping off collapsing balconies and running down burning sets of stairs, you know. And then you get the scene where the drug dealers trap Barthélemy and Popeye in the dam and open the sluice gates, you know, and suddenly you're into an action movie, and it's not action in the same way that you had action in French Connection. It's what we now think of as conventional movie action. You know, it's sort of shifting the bar a little bit, and not necessarily in the way that we wanted it to go. And it's not a good fit for Popeye Doyle. It's not what this character's about.
No, not at all. He's definitely a fish out of water in that respect. Yeah. The dry dock sequence as well. I mean, just feels kind of like, I don't know. It kind of feels like they go down into the dry dock, and they flood it. And it's like, well, what did you expect to happen?
Yeah, I know.
You know, it's like you stupid cops. You know, it's like, why are you going down there? You know,
This suddenly this isn't the forensic stroke obsessive Popeye Doyle. Yeah, you could argue that he's still recovering from his ordeal at that point, you know, and he's maybe not quite back up to scratch. But even so, you know, it ain't Popeye Doyle at that point.
No, I mean we've talked a lot about the sequel already, but we haven't mentioned John Frankenheimer as the director. So he's come on board. Frankenheimer, a fairly big, relatively big name director. He directed Manchurian Candidate, I guess, is the one in his back catalogue that people think, okay, that's what allows him to do French Connection too. Well, in the 60s, of course, he was on a roll. You know, he'd done that great trilogy of sort of paranoid movies with Manchurian, 7 Days in May, and Seconds. You know, which are all very different. After doing Seconds, I think Frankenheimer sort of hit the skids a little bit. You know, you look at the films that he made from the late 60s through to the mid 70s, and he's not quite the John Frankenheimer that he once was. I think he's still got sufficient clout for Hollywood to want to look to him as a guy that can helm a French Connection too. But I think we're getting an off-form John Frankenheimer at this point. But yeah, French Connection 2 comes at the end of a period where he's sort of got into a little bit of a rut, and we're not seeing the past glories. Having said that, I think he does a good job on this, and he's a good fit for it. He does. I mean, and the off Broadway drugs sequence that we're now dubbing that. that does feel like it feels in a John Frankenheimer movie.
Yeah.
You know, the paranoia and the drugs and that kind of stuff. That feels like it fits in.
So as a little 40-minute short, directed by John Frankenheimer, with Gene Hackman playing a character who isn't Popeye Doyle, we'd love that. But in French Connection 2, you're thinking, why is this in French Connection 2?
Yeah, just one of the things as well. They bring over Mr. Big from the first movie, the Charnier character. Don't seem to do much with him in this one either.
He's got an almost sort of supernatural aura about him in French Connection. He's kept as a very real character. You know, there's no sense of he can do magic tricks or perform miracles or anything. You know, it's not a fantasy, but I suppose in modern parlance we call him a supervillain, you know, but he's a very realistic supervillain, you know. But there is this sense, and it's exemplified by that subway carriage sequence that we mentioned, where he's getting on and off the train, and his timing is superb. It is almost supernatural, and he absolutely bamboozles Popeye Doyle getting on and off this subway car. And there's this sense with other things that he done where he can almost vanish into thin air at points. He seems to vanish into thin air at the end of the film. You know, very, very enigmatic ending to French Connection, which to this day, I don't know what happens. And I don't know what happens because Fernando Rey and the Charnier character are so magical that there's a sense that, yeah, poof, he could just disappear. Or he could at least hide in a place where he'll never be found, you know. And so that gunshot that goes off at the end could be a futile shot from Hackman. I don't know who shoots that gun at the end. And it's a great enigma. And I think enigma is the word to use about Fernando Rey and Alan Charnier. Now, there's no sense of that whatsoever in French Connection 2, is there?
He's a very ordinary boss. The only supernatural thing is that he seems to be forever on the verge of opening a bottle of red wine. He's like literally every time you see him, he's pouring a glass of wine. It's like, look, I'm an expensive mob boss kind of thing, you know. But okay, and Daryl, hit me with your.
Okay, I've just said that Charnier isn't a fantasy character in the French Connection. I think French Connection for me works much, much better if you treat parts of it as fantasy. Now, I'm going to start by talking about the character who's just billed as the old lady. Again, very, very enigmatically. She's played by Kathleen Nesbitt. And at the height of Popeye's enforced drug addiction, he's got heroin needles sticking out of his arm in this squalid sort of den that he's been imprisoned in, and this vision appears to him. She's portrayed as a real person, but we find out nothing whatsoever about her. She's billed as the old lady, and she wanders in out of nowhere, and she talks very, very enigmatically to Popeye. And my thoughts as I was watching that scene were, oh, this is an interesting character. This is an interesting little twist. Where are they going with this? You know, she's obviously a sort of den mother or something, you know, and how interesting that she sort of wandered in from nowhere. And what a great performance, you know. And then sort of thinking about the film later, especially in light of the ending of the film, which I'm going to talk about an interpretation of in a moment, I sort of think, was she actually real? Was she a sort of heroin hallucinated vision that Hackman has experienced there? And with that in mind, move on to the ending of the film. We've been very, very disappointed by the way that Frankenheimer and the film have sort of portrayed Fernando Rey. And also, although we've been pleased that the film hasn't copied the French Connection, it's sort of not copied it in a way that we haven't liked. And so we reach the finale. And again, I don't want to give anything away. I don't want to give too many spoilers here. But as you've already said, Adam, we get a situation at the end of the film which is imitative of the French Connection famous car train chase. And what we've got is Hackman on foot or via a streetcar, via a tram, going through the streets of Marseille, chasing a boat. Now, Fernando Rey may be on that boat, or he may not. We'd sort of seen a glimpse of somebody get on there. And again, Hackman's obsession kicks in here. He's convinced that it is Alan Charnier on this boat. And as the film plays out, I'm going to give no as little spoilers here as I can. As that scene plays out, there's more and more a sense of, oh, it's definitely Charnier on the boat. It's definitely him. And then we get something very, very similar at the end of French Connection to what we got at the end of the French Connection. I'm going to say no more than that for fear of spoilers. Now, that scene for me, I don't like that as a realistic finale. But if you've got this idea that maybe there's this sort of residue of heroin sort of, or whatever drug he's taken still in there, coupled with Popeye's absolute driven obsession that we recognize from the first movie, is he on a wild goose chase here? Has he convinced himself that Fernando Rey Alan Charnier is on that boat when he's not actually on the boat? And I'm leading myself to think that the whole last 5 or 10 minutes of the film is a mad fantasy of Popeye Doyle's. Now, many people may disagree with that interpretation, and I even disagree with it myself to a point, but I think it makes the film a better film.
I think there's certain sequences in that particular chase that are very different to everything else that happens in the movie. So you start to get POV shots. You see his hand in frame moving doors out of the way and going through barriers. So it's shot very differently. So obviously Frankenheimer wants you to think that this is different to what's gone on prior.
And I must have subconsciously picked up on that, I think, and thought, well, if he's saying it's different, is he saying it's not real? And again, the clues for me had been laid by other things in the movie, because I don't buy that Popeye Doyle goes cold turkey and recovers from heroin addiction in a week or whatever. And again, that makes more sense if what Frankenheimer's actually saying at the end of the film is, well, he hasn't. He's been rescued. I buy that he's been rescued and the police have done their best to sort of bring him round and get him back on the case. But it's a much better film for me if there is still this sort of residue of that sort of left over. And we see in the chase, especially the bits where he's on foot, there's this real sense of fat, sweaty copper. You know, he's chasing the boat on foot, but at various points you think he's losing it. He's not going to keep up with this. You know, he's going to have to get a taxi or flag a car down or something again. If you take all this as fantasy, if you take all this as the delirious ramblings of heroin-affected Popeye and obsessed Popeye's diseased mind and drive to catch a criminal no matter what, it makes a lot of sense. If you take it as Popeye knows that he's going after Alan Charnier and he knows that he's going to get him this time, it's weaker. It's not a good climax to the film.
Yeah, there's a couple of bits there where add fuel to your flaming theory. There's obviously the point of view shots suddenly in the film. So it's to say that you are looking through Popeye's eyes here.
Yeah.
And then you also get the shots of the person on the boat, and you see him on the boat, and you see the back of him. And then when you see Charnier later on in the scene, he's dressed completely different.
Yeah.
He's dressed as the sort of like drug baron, lord of all he surveys kind of thing, holding a glass of wine kind of thing.
Yeah. And again, I'm desperate to sort of skirt around this and avoid spoilers. But what I will say is the very, very, very end of both films has got similarity. That's all I'll say. And the end of French Connection, as I've already said, in an ultra realistic film based on a true story, the very, very, very end of the film is enigmatic, and we're not told what happens. Here we are told what happens, but because it's portrayed in the same way, again, I'm thinking, is there an element of enigma to this as well? Am I right in thinking that it's Popeye's deranged hallucination? And for me, if I interpret the film in that way, it's a better film.
There was a lot of that kind of stuff in early 70s cinema as well. You think things like The Passenger and a lot of these sort of like Jack Nicholson films where
even Clint Eastwood westerns do it.
Sure.
Outlaw Josie Wales and High Plains Drifter. There's a lot of that. Is this really going on, or is this character a ghost or a figment or whatever? It fed into a lot of early 70s Hollywood.
Cool. Well, I guess we'll never know.
Which is great, because it does allow me, you, and every other viewer out there to watch these films and to make their own interpretation. And I recommend that you do that with French Connection, and particularly with French Connection 2.
Before we finish, there is a third film.
Yeah.
There's a TV movie from the mid-80s, 1986, called Popeye Doyle.
Now, I've not seen this. I don't know if you have, Adam, but the fact that it's got Ed O'Neill playing Popeye Doyle, and the fact that it's got Candy Clark as the female lead, makes me want to see it.
I would like to see it, definitely. It obviously didn't have the impact that the first two French Connections had in popular culture.
Well, there's a point to make before we finish as well. French Connection, other than the Popeye Doyle TV movie, French Connection's not been remade. We've lived through probably 2 or 3 waves of film thrillers and crime movies since the 70s, where you'd think the idea of a French Connection remake must have been mooted at some point around the studios. Why has it never been remade, do we think?
I don't know. We've had 2 remakes of Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3 in those times. So why not a French Connection? I guess maybe it's just the case of it's still held in such high regard as an Oscar winner. You don't get that many big Oscar winners being remade like that. There's not been a Godfather remake. There's not been a MASH remake. Film-wise, or any of the big Oscar winners from the 70s, those kind of Last Picture Show remake,
I'm sort of pleased in a way, because people talk about this all the time and how a certain breed of actor has died out. Who could remotely play Popeye Doyle in the past 20 years?
Well, I think the problem with it is, like, if you're going to remake it now and you update it now, modern policing don't have characters like Popeye Doyle. They just don't exist in that world anymore. There's other evil, horrible, racist characters involved, but not that type where, damn the rules, that kind of stuff. We're going out on the streets and pounding the pavement.
So I guess if anyone was suggesting it, you'd have to do it as a 70s set period piece or a 60s set period piece, maybe, and maybe that's not in vogue. So, and again, I wonder if the people who play lead roles conventionally in this type of cinema at the moment, like a Keanu Reeves or someone, are they going to, or a Tom Cruise, somebody like that, they're not going to want to play grumpy old Popeye Doyle, the man you love to hate, are they? They're going to want to play a guy who shoots people, and that's not him,
No, but it's similar to how they cast the original French Connection. You wouldn't be looking at people like Keanu Reeves and that kind of level. You'd be looking at I don't know, like a Tom Hiddleston or a character actor who.
But are there the character actors around, like Gene Hackman, Bruce Dern, all the guys we've talked about from the early 70s? I don't think they exist anymore,
Maybe not, but I can see a Tom Hardy doing that role, or a Michael Fassbender, kind of gritty.
Maybe.
Not afraid of showing themselves in a relatively negative light,
That's possible.
There's only one way to find out, Daryl. Let's remake the French Connection. Cool, lovely. Thank you very much, Daryl. I want to thank BFI and Quad for supporting these podcasts. I hope you enjoyed the one today, and there'll be another podcast in a couple of weeks' time. Take care.